Okay, so this next set of problems comes from section 5.2, and these are going to be trinomials, and they're going to be the kind that end up leading with a plain x squared in front, like a 1x squared, rather than a number like this. Sometimes there's a number, because there's a GCF, we can factor that out, and then what will be left will look like this. But all of these ones are going to reduce down to something like these two. And in terms of the flow chart, we're in the three terms, so look for GCF first always. And then the first thing is the leading coefficient 1? If it is, it's of this form. And then we're doing the what multiplies to the end and adds to the middle thing that you may remember hopefully from an earlier class. So looking at this first one, so when we're in this form, what we're going to do is we're going to just set our set of parentheses, and we're going to lead with x's. And then we ask what multiplies to be the end but adds to be the middle. So what multiplies to 35 and adds to be 12. And so if we think of our factors of 35, we got 1 and 35 and 5 and 7. And 5 and 7 add to 12, so that's going to be it. The next one, same setup, so we have x is in front. And we're doing what multiplies to 30 and adds to be 17. But this time notice it's a negative 17, so back here they're both positive, so we didn't really even have to think about the signs. But here they multiply to a positive but add to a negative, so that means that both numbers are going to have to be negatives in order to add to a negative and multiply to a positive. We'd have to have the same signs. So if I think of 30, I got 1 and 30, I got 2 and 15, and I can stop there because 2 and 15 add to 17. And if I make them both negative, now they multiply to positive 30 and add to negative 17. So negative 2 and negative 15. This next one, so it's got a GCF this time. I got at least x squared everywhere. So I'll pull an x squared out front. It's going to leave me x squared plus 12x minus 28. And then you can see what's left is in the form of a one of these that leads with a 1, so we can just treat it as a 5-2 from there. The GCF just stays out front, doesn't affect anything, we just have to keep writing it down. And we can set up our parentheses, set up our x's in front. And now this time, so these ones are a little bit trickier when they multiply to a negative. So when they multiply to a negative and add to a positive, that means the bigger of the two numbers is positive. When they multiply to a negative and add to a negative, then that means the bigger, like the absolute value of the number is negative, the larger one. So pretty much the middle tells you the sign on what's the larger of the two numbers. And so we know we're going to have mixed signs, one will be plus, one will be minus. And then the other thing is they do add, and let me do the 28 and I'll show you what I mean by this. So for 28 we could have 1 and 28, we could have 2 and 14, and we could have 4 and 7. And so we're used to saying, what multiplies the end adds to the middle. But if you look at these, 1 and 28 is 29, 2 and 14 is 16, and 4 and 7 is 11. None of those add to 12, but that's because we're not accounting for the sign. And so if it's a negative, to me, it's easier to think of that the numbers are 12 apart, because then you can just sort of put the sign wherever it needs to be. So as I'm thinking through the numbers, I'm looking for ones that are 12 apart, then I can see it's 2 and 14. So I toss in my 2 and my 14, and I know the 14 is a positive because the big number carries the sign in the middle, and then the smaller the numbers is negative. So now they multiply negative 28, add to be 12. This one right here, so there's a 4 going on, so we'll get that out of the way. So now I have x squared minus x minus 4 goes into 120 30 times. Oops, I dropped an r right there. And r squared. So the trick with the extra letters is to just put them on the other end. So I got x times x up front and then r times r in the back, and that's going to give me the r squared and the x squared. And then when you do the cross terms, that's where you'll get the xr. This is rx, but just right in the other order. And then we're back to the plain old what multiplies to be negative 30. And then right here, this is a little bit tricky. There's a negative 1 right there. We don't usually write the 1, but that's at negative invisible 1 that we know and love from algebra. So we're multiplying to 30, and we need our numbers to be 1 apart, so that's going to be 6 and 5, and the 6 is going to be the negative. So we just put in minus 6 right there, plus 5 right there. Okay, so these next 6 are match problems, so I'll go through them a little bit quicker. So for here, we'll get our x's set up, and we're looking for what multiplies to be 24 and adds to be 11. So that'd be positive 3, positive 8. We know they're both positives because both numbers are positive. For number 14, set up the x's. Two numbers that multiply to be 60 and add to negative 19. So it's going to have to be two negatives to multiply to a positive and add to a negative. That's maybe not the easiest one to spot, so it's a good spot to make a list. So if we do 1 times 60, they're not 19. 2 and 30, so we're 32, getting closer. 3 and 20, 23, so closer still. And then 4 and 15, so there's our 2 that make the 19. So minus 4 and minus 15. And this is kind of like, if you can't spot it pretty quick, this is a good way to go, especially if it's a bigger number where you're likely to miss some of the factors like the 4 and the 15. If you just go straight down the list, you're going to hit it. This next one, so it multiplies to a negative but adds to a positive. So that means we're going to have mixed signs, and our big number is positive. So we'll toss the x's in. And so they're going to be multiplied to negative 32 and then 4 apart. So it's going to be a positive 8 and a negative 4. This one they have to multiply to be negative 70, add to be 3 or negative 3, but so we can think of them as 3 apart. So again, we set up our x's, and then it'd have to be a negative 10 and a positive 7. And again, the big number is negative because the middle's negative, big number's positive because the middle's positive. This one has a GCF, it looks like of 3x, so we'll pull that out front. That's going to leave behind x squared minus 12x and then plus 11. So our GCF just continues down, and then we do parentheses. Multiplies to 11, adds to 12. Only one thing multiplies to 11, it's 1 and 11. And they're both going to have to be negatives to add to the negative 12. And this last one for 5, 2. So we have x's in front, r's behind. So we'll set up xr and xr. And then we need them to multiply to 90, and then that's that little invisible 1 in there. So that means our numbers are 1 apart, so it sounds like 9 and 10. Since it adds to positive 1, 10 is going to be our positive, and 9 will be our negative.